If you're watching this video, you might be wondering which type of sleeping bag are you going to need. I got a few to look at. So if you're shopping around for a sleeping bag or quilt, there's a few things to consider. There's temperature rating, down versus synthetic, bag types, quilts, sizes, fill power, and at the end of the video, I'm going to give you some of my personal opinions. All right, so first thing to discuss is temperature rating. There's EN/ISO testing that's done in a lab to standardize warmth across all the manufacturers and bag types. Results for these tests are actually going to vary in real world application, real world use. So be careful of buying a sleeping bag just based off of its temperature rating. As a general rule of thumb, you're always going to want to aim for 10 to 15 degrees below the advertised temperature rating. And something you're going to want to look out for is you're going to want to dig into the information on the sleeping bags. There's 3 different types of ratings for these bags. You have comfort, you have limit, and then you have extreme. Oftentimes what manufacturers will do is they'll advertise their sleeping bags or their quilts with the lower limit temperature rating. So if you pick up a bag that's rated for 30 degrees and that turns out to actually be the lower limit rating, you're going to be very cold at 30 degrees. It's more than likely more suited for 45 degrees Fahrenheit at the lowest. A really good example of that is this REI Magma 30 degree sleeping bag that I got. Now, I did buy this very deliberately. It is used. I bought it secondhand. It's in really good condition. It had stickers for professional cleaning services attached to it. But this is advertised as a 30 degree sleeping bag, but I probably wouldn't use this sleeping bag outside of anything lower than 50 degrees. This sleeping bag is a bit notorious for not having enough down in it to keep you warm really below those temperatures. It may seem like I'm picking on this sleeping bag quite a bit, but this is a really good example of things to look out for with a sleeping bag. Now we're going to talk about different types of down. I have sleeping bags and quilts of various fill power down. Now fill power is essentially the weight of the down and how much it lofts. It's a really good way of rating down for how well it's going to retain heat for the person that's using the sleeping bag. There's a ratio of how much down is required to create so much loft. So a lower fill power down is going to require more down to create a certain amount of loft for whatever sleeping bag and whatever temperature rating they're aiming for. Now, if it was a 900 fill power down, it would require less down by weight to create the same amount of loft. And that's something you want to consider, and that's definitely going to dictate the price of the sleeping bags. Here I have a Nature Hike CW400. This has 650 fill power down. I have my Paria Thermodown 15 degree quilt. This is 700 fill power down, as well as the old version of the Thermodown 0 degree sleeping bag is 700 fill power. The new version is 800 fill power, so we just jumped up in fill power. And then I have this Ice Flame quilt. This is rated at 30 degrees. It has 850 fill power Muscovy down. So there's different types of down. You have duck, you have goose, you have Muscovy. I think there's a new one out there. I can't recall it off the top of my head. But as you move through those types of down in that order, they start to build in price. Down has a really good warmth to weight ratio. It's extremely packable and it'll last a really long time if it's cared for properly. One of the things you want to look out for with a down sleeping bag or quilt is keeping it in a mesh bag that allows it to breathe and it doesn't compress the down. You don't want to leave down compressed for long periods of time. I actually pack my bags for trips the night before. And so the max that my sleeping bags stay in a compressed state is roughly 24 hours. Synthetic sleeping bags and quilts are something that should be considered because they're really affordable, but they're a little bit on the heavy side and they don't pack down quite as much as down does. So it's one of the qualities that of down that's extremely sought after is how much warmth, how well it packs down, and the weight of it. Synthetics are heavier, they don't pack down as well, but they do have some advantages to them. They insulate really well even when slightly moist or wet. Um, they're budget friendly, as I said, and they do dry out a lot quicker than down does. Now, some people have down allergies. There are some prominent YouTubers out there. Dixie from Homemade Wonderlust, she has a down allergy that is kind of a bummer. I hate it for her, but synthetic might be the only option for some people. Next, we're going to talk about bag types. You have mummy bags, rectangular bags, double wide bags if that's what you're into, and then of course there's quilts. So mummy bags are really efficient at retaining heat, retaining warmth. One of the downsides of that is that they are more restrictive. The less area or the less space you have around your body, the less your body has to work to keep that air warm, and the warmer you're going to sleep. Trade-off is restricted movement. I tend to feel quite restricted in mummy bags, but depending on the temperature, my last trip I was out in 26-degree weather while it was snowing, and I slept nice and warm in my 0-degree sleeping bag, despite feeling a little bit restricted. Semi-rectangular bags are a meet in the middle there. They're still pretty efficient at retaining warmth and building heat, with a little bit more room, but that might not be what you're looking for. Double wide bags, again, like I said, if that's what you're into, if you and your partner are really looking to bond camping trips or backpacking trips, you might want to look into those. My biggest issue with that is differences in body types, differences in heat retention and warmth for people. I sleep typically a lot warmer than my girlfriend does. There's also the disadvantage of one person having to carry significantly more weight than the other and a lot more space being taken up in one backpack. When me and Angie are going out on trips, I typically am carrying more weight than she is, but I definitely don't want to take up more space in either one of our backpacks to have a double wide sleeping bag. There's also the issue of smell. So typically when you're out hiking, backpacking, camping, your body is going to smell. There's not really a whole lot you can do about it when you're out on trail, especially if you're out for multiple days. And the last thing I really want to subject my girlfriend to is my body odor while we are out camping. Quilts. Quilts are a little bit of a hot take. Some people will borderline be combative, whether they prefer a sleeping bag or a quilt. I'm sort of in the middle here, where I think they're advantageous in different applications and scenarios. I love the freedom of a quilt. It's extremely versatile. They're fairly non-restrictive. I still feel a little bit of restrictiveness, especially using the quilt straps to the pad, which brings me to the point of it does require a little bit of skill. There is a potential for drafts if it's not set up properly and depending on the type of quilt that you're using. Quilt warmth rating, they are going to have a temperature rating to them. They're not subject to the ISO, the EN/ISO testing like sleeping bags are. They're just not, even if a company claims that they are. Their quilts are a little bit of a different a setup, so it's hard to apply the same standards to a quilt than it is a sleeping bag. When using a quilt, they are also 100% totally dependent on the pad that you're sleeping on, the sleeping pad. So that's a whole different video topic for me to discuss. I'm just simply talking about quilts and sleeping bags at this point. One of the biggest advantages that quilts have over sleeping bags is the weight. Essentially, when you're laying in a tent, you're sleeping on a sleeping pad, whatever down is on the back between you and the sleeping pad is being compressed. Down does not insulate when it is compressed. I feel like it adds a little bit of value being underneath you, but it's not really a whole lot. So it's not something you essentially need to depend on. What you need to depend on is the warmth of the sleeping pad that you're sleeping to keep you insulated from the ground. A quilt is extremely versatile. I mean, I'll be using this 30-degree quilt for a majority of the year. Through spring, even summer when it's warm out, I might not even need the quilt, but it only weighs a pound and a half, about 20 ounces. Something to consider when you're shopping for a sleeping bag or a quilt is going to be the size of the sleeping bag. As I said, the amount of air inside the sleeping bag is going to affect how hard your body has to work to keep that air warm. So you want a sleeping bag that's going to fit for you. If you're a very short person, you're going to want to see if there's options available for a shorter person. I happen to be a medium height, 5'9", and I use regular size sleeping bags. I have a friend that I plan on bringing on trips with me, and that poses a little bit of an issue. He's going to need a tall sleeping bag because he's over 6 foot, so he's going to need a sleeping bag that fits him. If the sleeping bag is tight, you can actually compress the down a little bit by adding tension to the material of the sleeping bag. It can actually start to pull and compress the down, and then you wind up with a colder sleeping bag because it doesn't quite fit right. Now, on the opposite of that, if you have a bag that's way too big, you have too much space inside the bag, and you might end up sleeping colder because your body has to work harder to warm up that air. Another thing to consider is going to be shoulder girth. How wide are your shoulders? I actually have fairly broad shoulders, and so something like this REI Magma 30 that I said I was going to pick on, it happens to be quite narrow. The build of it is for a narrow person. So I got this sleeping bag primarily for my girlfriend to use. I don't plan on using this unless it's extremely hot out, and I don't necessarily need something to keep me warm. That way I can leave it open and kind of almost use it as a quilt. So just a recap on temperature rating, down versus synthetic, bag types, quilt sizes, fill power. When you're shopping for a sleeping bag and looking at temperature rating, you want to make sure that you're looking at taking into account if it's the limit rating or if it's the comfort rating. Down versus synthetic is totally a personal choice. How much space do you have in your bag? How much weight is your backpack? And do you have a down allergy? What's your budget? Different bag types. Personally, I'm sticking to a mummy bag or a quilt for less restrictive 3-season weather. Don't forget what size bag you're going to need, if you're going to need a wide, if you're going to need a tall, if you're going to need a short. A lot of companies will have different variations of tall wide, regular wide, short wide, different variations of that. Fill power is going to be dependent on your budget. There are quite affordable sleeping bags and quilts in the 700 fill power range. As you start to get into 800, 900, the price is going to significantly increase. Something you should take into account is don't look at EN ISO rating as gospel. Some companies like Paria, I have 3 Paria products here, they are not EN ISO tested. They look at the amount of loft, which is how thick the down is when it's allowed to expand. And there is a chart, I believe Enlightened Equipment has it on their website, but how thick the down is can actually be used to determine how warm the sleeping bag or the quilt's going to be. So that is something you can consider when you're shopping for smaller companies that haven't sent their products off to be tested. Now, lastly, I'm going to leave off with my personal opinions because I feel like you guys can probably relate to me more than some of the other people with higher budgets. I aim for affordability. So I'm kind of trying to balance cost with quality and features. if you plan to hike and or backpack like I do year round, you're gonna need a few different variations. A 30-degree quilt will last you a majority of the year, but in colder temperatures, you're gonna want a 15-degree quilt or potentially just go with a 0-degree sleeping bag, and that'll cover your bases. You can also pair these together if you really needed to. I could bring my 0-degree sleeping bag and my 30-degree quilt, and I would stack my quilt on top of the sleeping bag, and that would add additional warmth. If I catch a plane and I go to a state park or a national forest in a different state, colder climate, colder time of year, for more than what I'm prepared for, then I can bring two different options with me and make sure that I stay warm. I typically am looking for sleeping bags and quilts around the 800 fill power range, 8 to 900. This was my first sleeping bag, Nature Hike CW 400. This is a 650 fill power down sleeping bag, rectangular with a hood. I like it. It's very comfortable. It's good for summer, but it's a little bit on the heavy side compared to my 30-degree quilt. I wouldn't buy this at full price. I got two of these actually for half price. So when I first started backpacking, this was an awesome option for me. I eventually found this company called Ice Flame Gear. I see a lot of people using these in Europe and the UK, and really affordable, honestly, really high quality, really good features to this quilt. I did use it in temperatures down around 35, 36 degrees and stayed fairly warm. But again, quilts are going to be dependent on the type of sleeping pad that you're using underneath you. Another personal thing for me is base layers. So you guys know I talk about Cuddle Duds base layers quite a lot. And in early spring, late fall, through winter, base layers while you're sleeping are going to be really important. I also like to pair my fleece top layer to help add warmth in certain scenarios, a beanie and or my fleece sort of hood with a face cover. I actually also really like to, in really cold temperatures, take my down jacket and I stuff it down in the foot box of my sleeping bags or my quilts. That helps retain some heat, take up some space around my feet. It also, a little bit of a hack, keeps your jacket warm for when you have to get up in the morning. Another thing I personally do is I always bring a lower temperature rated sleeping bag than the temperatures I'm expecting. If I'm going to go out next week in 45-degree weather, 45-degree low temperatures, I'm going to bring my 30-degree quilt. I might even bring my 15-degree quilt. If I'm going to go out and expect unexpected sub-freezing temperatures, I'm more than likely just going to bring my 0-degree sleeping bags. Even if I wake up kind of warm, with a 0-degree sleeping bag or a 15-degree sleeping bag, you can always dump heat, open up the bag a little bit, cool yourself off. I'm leaning into using quilts for warmer temperatures just because of the versatility of them, the comfort of them. You can pull them over you, kind of like the blanket at home. You can take it completely off. They weigh a lot less. So again, my Ice Flame quilt, this is going to be my go-to for a majority of the year. Now, this video is mostly aimed at what we call quote-unquote ground dwellers, people that sleep in tents, that sleep on the ground. Now, if you're a hammock camper, I don't have the experience to speak on that. That poses different obstacles for hammock campers if that's something that you want to do. I may end up trying it in the future, but are you just going to sleep in the hammock? If you are, you're going to need a underquilt plus a top quilt. If I know some people use hammocks with sleeping pads, so then you might not need the underquilt, but I don't have the experience to speak on that. So one last thing I'd like to add into this video is using bag liners to extend the temperature ratings. If I take my 50-degree rated sleeping bag and I take a thermo liner, which there's a ton of different brands out there. Sea to Summit's a big brand in in liners that boost warmth. Just be careful. Don't take that temperature rating boost as gospel. It can definitely help keep your bag clean, keep you warmer when in colder weather than the sleeping bag is rated for. But that's definitely an option to look into if you buy a sleeping bag and you want to extend its temperature range. Get you a fleece liner or a thermo liner. That wraps up the video. I hope this gave you some good information in considering sleeping bags or quilts or what you kind of want to get. What's going to serve you a majority of the year, and then look into colder weather depending on what types of conditions you're going to experience in the future. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I will see you guys in the next video. Bert, I can't have you doing this while I'm trying to film. I appreciate you wanting to be on camera. Stop recording.